thing happened to William and Stanley on their way to college.
At what point did you shoot the clerk?
They got framed for murder.
Whoa! Wait a minute!
Now, two kids from New York are in deep trouble.
It's time to make your phone calls.
The clan's here. They're inbred. They sleep with their sisters.
In the deep South.
Some of them do.
And only one man can save them.
We need to call an attorney, a great attorney.
He's not your typical hero.
We got an attorney in the family. Great, who?
He's
My Cousin Vinny.
Hello, and welcome to episode 22 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks, we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection, and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and to my left coast, left-ish, is...
Dan Bergman.
Yay! I'm sorry, yay.
And there was much rejoicing.
Yay! This is episode 22. We're, moving up there, double digit 2-2, like double repeating digits.
Getting up there.
Yes, we are. And in this episode, we will be discussing My Cousin Vinny.
My Cousin Vinny.
They worked that into the movie. It was kind of intriguing, but we'll talk about that later. First up, we're going to get to our listener feedback from our Alice in Wonderland episode, and we have none. So far, we have not received any listener feedback. So once again, I implore you, dear listeners, if you like what we're doing and want to give us a little bit of feedback, or you want to tell us what your favorite ride was at Disneyland, or any of the questions that we asked during the episode, drop us a line.
Yeah, it sounds like, please call us. We're lonely in here.
Yes, we want some love. We need love.
Yeah.
But we did get one like on the podcast page, on the Podbean page, and that was from listener Jeff Edwards, again, a staunch listener, so we appreciate that. We're looking forward to getting more likes from the other people that are listening, because we see the downloads. We know you're out there.
Yeah, even if it's relatively negative feedback, we're just happy that people are listening. And if you want to tell us that we're boring or that we suck, hey, tell us. It's like helps us get better.
Yeah, and we can tool things around. We've done it before. Not afraid to do it again.
To paraphrase, it's like, you are by far the worst podcasters I have ever heard of, but you have heard of us.
Exactly. So, on to how did this get on your shelf? And I'm going to ask that question of myself first. Brian, how did this get on your shelf? Well, Brian, it's not actually on my shelf, so I don't really have an interesting story. I did watch it on a streaming service that I have access to, and I enjoyed it, but I don't own this movie. So, over to you, Dan.
Well, wait, when you said that you saw it on a streaming, did we not see this together? No, I guess we didn't know each other. It came out in 92, so no, I did see it while I was in the Navy, but I guess I didn't see it with you. I didn't know you yet.
Nope, not yet.
Okay, so I guess it's one of those times where the decade gets all mashed together into one single event.
Yeah, I think I own this on VHS. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, you might.
Yeah, but I've since gotten rid of all of those, so... except for a few.
Yeah. But like I said, I did see this in the theaters, and I immediately thought, wow, this is a great movie. And it wasn't one of those where, like, I must immediately go buy it. But when I did find it in a, not necessarily a discount bin, but at a discounted price, I was like, yeah, I remember this movie, I liked it, and I bought it. Unfortunately, it's an edition that doesn't have a whole lot of special features.
That was big in the mid-90s when those things were first coming out. They weren't special feature heavy. They just had maybe the trailer and maybe some extras like, hey, go watch these movies too.
Yeah, or I believe the one I have has like a, the commentary, the track where you can select that and everything. But, to tell you the truth, as much as an avid DVD owner that I am, I rarely ever listen to those.
Same here.
It's just like I'm watching the movie and it's like I really get into the movie and I just want to watch the movie. It's not that they don't have anything good to say. It's, I don't know, I'm just not the person to listen to it, so.
I know some people that do, though. Some people who are very
Oh, yeah.
heavily into films and really enjoy hearing the director's take and that sort of thing. And I've done it before. I just don't do it on the regular.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I don't do it on the regular, but yeah, like I said, it was a very very special feature light, and back then it wasn't as much of a thing for me as it is now. I would buy it again if they came out with a version that talked about how accurate it is in a legal sense.
I don't think it was very accurate. I kind of took some notes, but there were some interesting legal terms thrown around. I just don't know that it was.
Well, you and I then have a different experience because that's one of the things I was going to talk about, just how praised this is by lawyers.
Really?
But yeah, and we'll get into that.
Okay. I didn't do any research in that area, so because I assumed that it was, while appropriate, all rise when the judge comes in and that sort of thing, there were some legalistic points that were accurate, but not but not the actual trial courtroom feel. But maybe that's just because I watch a Law and Order and I expect a different sort of lawyerly entertainment, if you will, presentation.
Well, I don't know. You want to jump into that?
Yeah, if you want to. We've already discussed how it got onto our shelves, or not, as the case may be, and
all right.
we can just move right into talking about the movie.
Okay. Well, I mean, just right off the bat, I mean, just the first thing that I wanted to talk about was just, again, the trial and procedure aspect of this movie being so accurate. I'm the kind of person that likes a level of accuracy in certain movies, and it doesn't necessarily make or break a movie, but it definitely helps a lot. I mean, an extreme case of that was Braveheart. That was a movie I really enjoyed, but the combination between finding out the kind of person that Mel Gibson is and then realizing just how inaccurate and how loose they were with the facts kind of destroyed that movie for me.
From the standpoint of learning history through movies, I always take those movies with a grain of salt, because afterwards, especially nowadays with the internet, you can go find out the inaccuracies and go, okay, that was true, that was not, that was not, that was not, that was true. And the other piece of it is, when they reenact conversations, it's not like there was a recording device on hot standby just listening. So it really is just kind of, well, this is what we think he might have said, or this is what we think she might have said. So...
Yeah.
I recognize there's creative liberties taken.
And again, absolutely. It's like, because in the contrast to that, which was, for me, Black Hawk Down, I understand that there's a lot of creative liberties that need to be taken because, it's like, as we've discussed before, Hollywood, their primary concern is selling a product, not necessarily making things accurate. But they do their best. And, like I said, with Black Hawk Down, yeah, I understand, okay, this person couldn't be portrayed by a single actor, so they made an amalgam. We couldn't exactly portray where the second Black Hawk went down because we don't have a location that can accurately portray that, but we're going to do it here. We're going to do the best we can. And I understand that. In that case, I say, okay, I don't say I give it a pass like I'm in charge or something like that, or like my opinion really matters. But, for me, I do that.
Yeah, but it goes to the audience buy-in. You do give it a pass. You're like, okay, it's not historically accurate, but it builds the tension, it does what it's supposed to do, and it's reasonably similar to the events as they have been laid out.
And that's why, a movie like Pearl Harbor made a lot of money, but someone like me who always watched Tora because it's a better depiction of the attack on Pearl Harbor. That's just a movie buff in me. So bringing this back around to My Cousin Vinny, I've watched, quite a number of courtroom movies where it's like the main focus is on characters, the life and death struggle, is he guilty, is he not? But I think My Cousin Vinny had kind of a secondary focus, which was more equal to the plot, his actual courtroom procedure. And I had seen a Reddit article, it was the TIL, Today I Learned, that My Cousin Vinny was used in law school to teach courtroom procedure and rules of evidence. And I thought, okay, well, it's Reddit, take that with a grain of salt. And it was funny because one user comment said, my dad's a lawyer and My Cousin Vinny is the only movie he doesn't yell at TV.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I did some more research and I found there's a law blog. It's called Litigation and Trial. And there's a short little article. It says, every young lawyer needs to watch My Cousin Vinny is the title. And it's by a Max Kennerly, Esquire. And I guess he went to the Beasley School of Law at Temple University, and he cites his professor, Joanne Epps, who is now the dean, and she suggested My Cousin Vinny was required reading. And he goes on to say that, he thought movies like To Kill a Mockingbird, 12 Angry Men, and The Verdict were better courtroom movies. But she cites that even though it's a bit of a farce, that their portrayal of presentation of evidence and courtroom procedure was spot on by this movie.
Interesting.
Kind of an unlikely source of that kind of teaching, so to say, a teaching tool.
Sometimes the things you think are the most inaccurate are the most accurate. I'd never considered looking up the legal accuracies because I always just assumed it was taking the perceived standard and just pushing it a little bit farther. So I assume, like I said earlier, the all rise when the judge enters, and there were some legal terms that were thrown around, like when Marissa Tomei took the stand and the prosecutor said, I'd like to voir dire this witness to determine her level of knowledge to see if this is an acceptable expert testimony. I'd heard that before. When they were talking about discovery and all that sort of thing. These are terms you hear on the news all of the time. And in this day and age, when you can watch trials on TV, especially like the OJ trial was on 24/7, you could watch how a courtroom played out. And I never really thought to make the comparison because I just sort of dismissed it as this scenery, the backdrop of the story of My Cousin Vinny and, Joe Pesci trying to be a lawyer.
Yeah, it's there's a quote in this article, and it's by a Professor Alberto Burnaby. Forgive me if I pronounced that incorrectly, but the article says young trial lawyers without much trial experience owe it to themselves to watch My Cousin Vinny for the reasons raised by Professor Alberto Burnaby. And it goes, a quote, after Vinny's girlfriend Mona Lisa bails him out for a second time after having been found in contempt, she criticizes his performance in court and tells him it is pretty clear he does not know what he was doing. She then utters one of my favorite lines in the movie, don't they teach you that in law school? Vinny's response is just as classic, no. They teach you contracts. Obviously, the implication is that law school, they teach law, not how to practice law. Vinny is terrible at things we do teach in law school, but very good at things we don't. Although Vinny is certainly no role model when it comes to knowledge of law, legal analysis, and ethical behavior, law students could learn from him as to how to use legal thinking in the complexity of actual law practice. Vinny needed to learn legal analysis, that which law schools are best equipped to teach, while many of today's graduates need Vinny's inherent ability to interview clients, to gather facts, to prepare a theory of a case, to negotiate, to know when to ask a question and when to remain quiet, to cross-examine a witness forcefully but with charm in order to expose the weaknesses in their testimony, and so on. And again, using the actor Joe Pesci to exemplify that ability to talk to people, I think, and to be forceful but with charm, boom, right there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I Googled that while you were reading the quote, and I found a couple of other articles that support exactly what you're saying, some interviews. I listen to a lot of NPR, and there was a link to NPR, so I clicked on that one. And Elizabeth Birch, who teaches law at the University of Georgia at the time of this interview, which is 2017, about a year ago. And one of the other aspects of this movie that they use to teach is the unfamiliarity of going into the courtroom for the first time as a lawyer. Because, again, it's an exaggerated example, but they take Vinny from New York and put him in Alabama completely, and the article says this as well, the interview rather. He's completely out of his element, and then he's in the courtroom trying to do what a lawyer is supposed to do, and he's in Alabama. The Alabama piece is secondary to showing the example of being out of his element, and that's one of the other reasons why they show that to up-and-coming trial lawyers, because it gives you a humorous look at how to deal with being out of your element. Again, you can learn things from movies. I think we've discussed that a number of times. I just didn't know that they strove so hard for this movie to be legally proper.
I don't know if you can say that was a huge goal of theirs, that it was just serendipitous, or somebody just really knew what they were doing. Just good writing, but I can't argue with the end product. It's an endearing movie. I mean, my wife loves this movie. It's one of those rightly so. I think the thing that I liked about this movie in a movie sense, I mean, we'll get to the other reasons why we love it. The point brought up in this blog, and that I happen to really agree with, is that this movie didn't really contain any bad guys.
No, they were just people searching for the truth, as it were.
Yeah, when I first went into this movie, and the scene when Ralph Macchio and his friend, when they are first arrested, they're pulled over. He thinks it's over the shoplifting, that he accidentally took
over the can of tuna, yeah.
The can of tuna. everything. And I don't know if he was a deputy or the police officer comes out with a shotgun, and we're like, oh, great. Here's this, typical portrayal of the South. They're overblown and everything. But it turned out, no. It's like they thought they were arresting murder suspects who were armed and dangerous.
Right, which makes sense.
Yeah, it made perfect sense and everything. So, okay, so that aspect was that stereotype or whatever. It was that was removed. It's like, nope, actually they acted correctly. And you thought, okay, Southern judge corrupt. Nope, he just was very stern.
No, Herman Munster was just an upright judge.
Upright judge. The lawyer, the prosecutor, I should say. You thought maybe him? No, he's just doing his job. Just the way he does it.
But again, and that goes to the characterization of prosecuting attorneys. He just wanted to win. He thought he had the right people, and he wanted to win. Towards the end of the movie, when Vinny starts turning the case around, you can see him do the, oh, wait a minute, hold on. These are not actually the right guys, and that's when he makes the motion to dismiss. So he does the right thing, too.
So, yeah, that's the thing that just made this movie, endearing to me is that, it didn't utilize a lot of the stereotypes. It didn't use a lot of cliches. It gave me something I wasn't expecting, and it entertained me in a way that made me look at it and go, wow, that was pretty accurate. It was engaging, and it just portrayed people doing their thing. Even though it doesn't always happen in real life, everything worked out, and it was a very satisfying ending.
I agree. Except for the stereotype statement. I think this movie is a treasure trove of stereotypes, just not necessarily as they pertain to the legal pieces. Vinny from Brooklyn, Joe Pesci is... He's Joe Pesci. Look at his body of work, especially in the 90s, and he is just playing a lawyer version of pretty much the fast-talking, same kind of guy that he always plays in Goodfellas and in Lethal Weapon 2 and... all the other movies that he's been in, he's always pretty much been the same type of guy, fast-talking. Marissa Tomei, playing the Joyzy girl, who is worked at her dad's as a mechanic, and that is a stereotype if ever there was one. And it plays against the stereotype of girls can't know mechanics by putting her in the South, where there's this stereotype, well, were you doing some paperwork or were you cleaning up after the boys? And pulls that kind of thing. So again, a stereotype. The fish out of water element of going from the city to the country and the hunting, it plays to North versus South. About the only thing that doesn't really get stereotyped. Yeah, I don't think there is anything that doesn't get really stereotyped, but it's for comedic effect. It's not used negatively. It's expanded on and exaggerated to get a laugh. What is a grit?
Was it a rhetorical question or?
Kind of. Well, no self-respecting Southerner would ever use instant grits. Like, well, when you don't even know what the hell a grit is in the first place, the option that there are instant grits as a thing that you could use would never even, like, oh, look, instant grits. I, by the way, happen to love grits with a little bit of butter, but that's just me.
Well, the whole idea of a self-respecting Southerner not using instant grits, I don't know, I think it was a matter of circumstance because I knew some Southerners in the Navy, and they didn't seem to have much of a problem using the instant grits, but then again, that was all that was available.
I was going to say, when that's the only option, you go with what you got.
Yeah, you have a valid point about the stereotypes used to comedic effect. But yeah, I think it's like they weren't used in a serious sense to actually say that this is how it is. Some people could argue it was a very cleaned up version of the South, so to say. You didn't see a lot of examples of racism, which has been ubiquitous to the South for a very long time. You didn't see a lot of that, although there was that one line when Mr. Trotter, the prosecuting attorney, said, English from our ancestors, and the camera focused on the African-American lady in the jury. She didn't make a face, but that short little camera focus was like, ooh.
That was a little bit of a poke. Pook.
Yeah, it looked like it could have been really uncomfortable, but they didn't dwell on it for very long. Like I said, it was only a few seconds, and then they moved on.
And I like that because that wasn't the point of the movie. If you're going to make that the point of the movie, then obviously hit it hard, do it whenever you get the opportunity. But that was, again, to poke fun at that stereotype that we're all from England. Like, yeah, no, we're not.
No, we're not. To me, it was just, yeah, this is not what the movie's about, but we know we're watching. It's like, don't think we're ignoring this.
I actually had made a note about that particular scene that you just mentioned. So for the exact same thing, it was kind of you've covered the South in general, you've discussed grits, you've put people in positions and all that sort of thing. And one of the things that they also did, and the opening scene where Ralph Macchio and his buddy are driving into Alabama, which if you're going to UCLA and you're on any kind of a schedule, I don't understand why you would ever go due south and then cut straight across. I mean, if you're going to do it at an angle and hit down to, one of the lower freeways, that's fine. They mention it in passing, like, yeah, we just wanted to kind of come down here and then cut across. We thought it'd be nicer. Like, all right, well, I would never ever do that, but that's just me. Anyway, but as they roll into Alabama, you see all of the little things that they look at. Free manure, free dirt, the hubcap hut, all these little southern country stereotypes. Because, I mean, if you go to Atlanta, it's just another city. But if you get, out into 2 lanes highways of Alabama, it's different.
Well, I think that's, again, the thing about movie making, and sometimes they have to take creative liberties and whatever. And I think when it comes to that, this is the opening scenes. This is the establishing shots. If you go through any town USA, there's no real sense that, okay, am I really a fish out of water? Because this looks exactly like where I live. So the audience would not get that sense of these people are in a different part of the country that they are not familiar with. Because except for people who actually live in the South, everyone who's watching this movie, like you said, if they went through Atlanta and they saw just the city, all right, they're in a city. I don't get the sense of alienation that they might feel, that they're that they're strangers in a strange land. I wouldn't get that. So, yeah.
Which is a great book, by the way. Just throwing that out there.
All right. But they show them the thing. It's like, you don't see places. Now, I'm going to put a caveat. I have seen places here in Southern California, liberal central, where I've seen signs, free dirt. I've seen signs, not specifically the Hubcat hut, but it might as well have been. It's like you go a little bit east of Los Angeles, it's still Southern California, it's San Bernardino County. You see stuff like that. You could probably film My Cousin Vinny in San Bernardino County and make it think that you're in the American South.
Yeah, well, they actually did film this in Alabama.
Well, which is great.
I did some research. I know this is we'll bring it back to your point, but I did some research on the first hotel that they stayed at, the General Putnam, because I didn't know who General Putnam is. I got sidetracked, so I still don't know who General Putnam is. But the hotel that they stayed at received a 2.3 overall average for reviews on Google. It looks like, according to my research, it's been closed for about 3 or 4 years now. After this movie, they saw a little bit of a lift in people just coming by to see it, but obviously not enough to sustain the business.
Yeah.
And the whistle that blew is actually about 19 miles away, and there's no possible way they would have heard it. But hey, it's fun for drama, and it's not the first time we've ever seen that in a movie.
Yeah, and again, creative liberties. You need to tell a story. You need to make some changes. To me, like I said, that's the perfect example of one of those that's, it's no big deal. You needed to make things tough for Vinny. So
right, you needed something to wake him up. It was there. I mean, who cares where it actually is in real life? Because, like Terminator 2, I was stationed in Long Beach, and that bridge scene towards the end of the movie where they go into the steel mill, but they're on the bridge. That bridge goes straight into what used to be the Long Beach Naval Station, and they're going over it, and I'm watching going, yay, I've been there, I've driven that bridge. That's like, hey, they're doing it again. They actually drove over the bridge twice in the movie, and you don't really notice because they sort of just pick it up where it was, and they're still on a bridge. But they actually, you can, if you look at the landmarks, you're like, they just passed that. What, did they go back and do it again? So, it's little things that help the story along, and it doesn't really matter.
No, but so, kind of going back again to, like I said, the establishing shot. Yeah, we call those things that you see as stereotypical to the South and everything, but as I pointed out, you can see them anywhere.
I think it's more indicative of rural areas as opposed to the South specifically.
Yeah, you could say that and everything, but, when you think rural, I think the South is definitely something that pops into mind first amongst the American psyche.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't think people think of rural in the Southwest, even though there's plenty of farms in Southern California.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the point I brought up. Why I brought that point up is that you're in Southern California and you'll see the same exact thing. But if somebody was to use that in an establishing shot in a movie, it might confuse people, and that's why if you want to convey that you're in Southern California, what do they show? They show you Hollywood. They show you the Walk of Fame, or you might see Disneyland and Universal.
Oh yeah. No, it sets a scene. That's exactly what it was there for. I just found it amusing.
Yeah. So I mean, but like I said, you bring up that it's a stereotype of the South, whether it be fair or not. It is something that's in the psyche, and that's what they use for the establishing shot. So you can tell that these New Yorkers, which we don't at the time, we didn't know they were New Yorkers. We found out later, but
Well, no, because the car had New York license plates in the opening scene.
oh, okay, oh yeah, that's true. I forgot about that little detail.
The 1964 faded mint green Dodge, or rather Buick Skylark.
Yeah. And it's funny, I watched that scene over and over again, and I still can't exactly recite that verbatim just yet. Certain movies I can recite lines verbatim. That one I cannot.
I occasionally mess it up, I'm not going to lie. Like I just did.
Blah.
I was pretty close. Close enough for government work.
Yes.
But yeah, the car was from New York. They set that early to establish the fish out of water piece. And like we talked about in Tu Wong Fu, this is kind of the same sort of thing where they're on a journey and they get stuck in the middle, because why would you make a movie if it was just... And they drove from there to there. Well, okay, well, there better be something happening along the way.
Well, see, the contrast with that one is, like, in Tu Wong Fu, the establishment is that, here you got these drag queens. They're performing in this elaborate, big city production. They're living in a big city, so it was environment rather than location.
Oh, sure, but it was still fish out of water, same sort of concept.
Yeah, so they could have ended up anywhere. Just the fact that it was just they were in the middle of nowhere. They show up in this little town, this little burg, whatever. A few houses here, the general store, and they're kind of run down. That's all that was required.
And that goes to establishing the fish out of water piece in My Cousin Vinny, is these guys are from the city, from New York City, that neck of the woods, and now they're in the South, which is an alien location. So it's kind of the same thing. I mean, I don't want to draw too many parallels there because, it's just that one sort of broad thing that applies. But the other pieces, they're in, crappy hunk of junk cars. They're a little rusty, not necessarily the most well-maintained, that sort of thing. But anyway, the idea is they're both driving cross-country. They're both ending up in awkward situations because of either something else happening or the car breaking down. I mean, that's really about the only parallel. Who knew we were going to do that?
I wasn't expecting it.
I'll bet our listeners knew. I bet they did. They've figured us out. And they should send us feedback to let us know.
Wow, you're really pushing that feedback thing, huh?
I am. It's kind of a thing. I like feedback. One of the other things, going back to the faded mint green Buick Skylark, one of the things that, as I was watching the trial portion of this movie, that kind of made me a little nuts, is they seemed to be very focused on the color of the car, because in 1964, only the Plymouth Fury was available with positive traction, blah, 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 blah. And it was also available in mint green and looks just like that. But every picture, with the exception of, I think, maybe one or two, all of the pictures that are entered into evidence by the prosecution are black and white photos. Like, why make such a big deal about the color of the car if you're going to show me a black and white photo?
I think it was just, they were also looking at the witness statements about, what did you see? Oh, this witness saw a green car. And I think that was necessary. I mean, yeah, they're black and white photos, but it's still, what did the witness see? What is the witness testifying? I saw a green car.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about this movie is it also calls into question eyewitness testimony as a concept, which research has been done that calls that into question in the first darn place. Because we kind of see things that we want to see. They will have people run into a room, grab something, and then have people try and describe the person that ran in, and they will report different colors of shirts. They will report different types of hair. And then they'll have the person walk back in and then go, oh, we were all wrong. Or, some were right about certain aspects and that sort of thing. Obviously, that makes the police investigation that much more difficult because they have to piece together the commonalities and try and bring it together in a thread to present to the district attorney so that they can decide whether or not to move forward with the case.
Yeah, it's the practice of law enforcement. Who knew that it would be so difficult to make sure that everybody's rights aren't violated?
Who knew that was complicated? That's the interesting thing. It's complicated.
Complex. You just can't say, hey, I saw him do it.
Unless you have it on video, in which case that's a little bit different. So one of the other things that I did want to talk about, since we're on the topic of police procedure, and we discussed sort of the legal accuracies, so now I'm going to ask, what was the deal with them not being cuffed? If they're accused of murder, wouldn't it make more sense to have them interrogated in a place where they couldn't get their hands on a typewriter and club somebody? I mean, they put Ralph Macchio's buddy in what amounted to an office storage closet, and he wasn't cuffed, at least not that I could see. Ralph Macchio didn't appear to be handcuffed when he was talking to the sheriff. And they make it a point to say, do you waive your rights, to counsel? Have you been read your rights or whatever? So that when they go through the whole misunderstanding of him confessing, and he doesn't know that they're not talking about the same thing, so because nobody proclaimed their pronouns, did you do it? Yeah, I did it. I mean, I didn't realize it was such a big deal. Really? You did it? And you didn't, no one ever said murder, and no one ever said stole a can of tuna by accident. The whole thing is predicated on a misunderstanding in the first damn place. But at no point are these murder suspects, one, informed that they're being arrested for murder, or that they're being charged with murder, which I would think would be a pretty big deal. I mean, don't get me wrong, if I'm ever arrested, I just want a lawyer. I mean, I know only the guilty ask for a lawyer. I'm like, no, I just want to make sure I don't inadvertently say something so that I know what you're charging me with, so that I can be clear about these things. And two, I would have a reasonable expectation if I were being charged with murder that you would probably want to restrain me, because if you're charging me with murder, you suspect that I have the potential to be violent and would want to keep me from causing you harm. That part kind of rankled me a little bit. Again, it's the movie magic, it's the okay, I'm good, but it still vexed me a little bit that it took forever for them to be even in prison uniforms.
Yeah, I'm going to play devil's advocate on this for the sake of movie making and telling the story. Yeah, if they had handcuffed them and put them in, heavy restraints and treated them as murder suspects that we'd expect the way that murder suspects would be treated, then that would say, why did the character not question it's like all this for a can of tuna? And then that would have caused another line of dialogue, and the movie would not have progressed in the way it goes.
What's one line? They still would have said, I need a lawyer. It wouldn't have been as amusing as it was when he found out that he was being charged with murder and that this was a misunderstanding.
Yeah, but I think, though, it would have gone a different direction if he said, hey, all this for a can of tuna. It's like, you think this is just for a can of tuna? It's like, son, you're being charged with murder. And like, whoa. And then, it wouldn't have the confession. And who knows? Again, this movie making, they probably would have gone through with it and says, yeah, these guys are denying that they committed murder. They say it's just a can of tuna, and I'm going to go ahead and prosecute them anyways. Or, but district attorney would be like, can of tuna, man, I don't know if I should go forward with this case.
Yeah, maybe we need some more supporting evidence to move forward.
Because, the thing we said about this movie is that these weren't, they weren't portrayed as corrupt. These were guys who were just doing their job. And from what I know, having friends and acquaintances who are police officers and talk about that, for a district attorney to move forward on a case, there's a lot that they have to present to them, because they're not just going to go in and go willy-nilly into a court case, because court cases are very expensive.
Sure, and you have to be reasonably certain that you're going to win, which is why plea deals are such a thing, because they're like, you know what, I don't have enough evidence to really convict you of this thing, but I know you did a thing, you know you did a thing, and let's just save everybody some money here, and you take this, and we won't try to convict you of that.
The other aspect of that is that district attorneys, those are elected positions, and you campaign by saying, hey, I won this many cases. I've done the people this good a job. So again, he's going to be very dubious about what cases he takes.
Right, because you don't get that many wins by not picking the cases that you can win in the first place.
Yeah, so in that sense, the confession, it's something that, hey, I got a confession from this guy, and it's like, oh, well, if we got that, let's go forward.
Right, but even so, when they were extracting the confession through the misunderstanding that ensued by the wrong it, when the sheriff finally told Ralph Macchio that, or rather when he asked him, you shot the clerk? He says, I shot the clerk? In a questioning tone. Mm-hmm. But later on, during the trial, they had the sheriff reading the testimony, or reading the confession, reading the script, if you will, of that confession. And he says, and that's when you shot the clerk. I shot the clerk. So you're saying you shot the clerk. I shot the clerk. And he reads it back in a totally different tone.
Exactly.
Which, again, goes to, it's not what you say, it's how you say it that conveys the meaning. Mm-hmm. And this is a total tangent, and I'll bring it right back. Yep. But that's why it is so difficult to have a rational conversation on Facebook and Reddit and in social media is because unless you craft it in such a way that there is no discernible out to twist what you said into something else, no one can read your inflection. So you can't necessarily always be sarcastic, and you can't always make a joke unless you put the little smiley emoji with the little winky eye and little tongue sticking out so that people know, hey, I'm joking. This is not serious.
Yeah, very true. But to bring it back, this is, to me, a pretty decent portrayal of the imperfections of police work. Because he says, "Oh, I'm getting a confession," and he, like you said, he reads it off in a very different way than the way Ralph Macchio said it. Because it is my understanding that police officers, like most other jobs, they want to do a good job. They want to give the next level everything they need to complete the job, and they don't necessarily do that in a 100% accurate and correct way. So in this police officer's mind, I'm getting a confession. I shot the clerk. I shot the clerk. We're going to get a prosecution out of this. And again, I'm not saying it was a malicious intent or whatever, but I mean, it's just like if you try to be accurate about it, might not get the job done. He might not even be thinking that, it's just like he just was like, hey, I got this. I got what I needed. Here it is. I hesitate to use the word lower level of operation, but, let me just put this in the context that I do know. I mean, I'm a paramedic. I get an assessment from the patient who tells me about what is ailing them. I have to give that report to a nurse, sometimes a doctor. And the patient may say, well, that's not what I said, or that's not what I mean, or whatever. But in my eyes, it's just like, look, I just need to get the information that tells me that, you're probably having a heart attack. In actuality, the patient may just be having gas. And obviously he's going to tell the doctor something a little different than what I told him sometimes. Inaccuracies, they happen more often than you think. They're not always detrimental. They don't always lead to something as bad as like this case in this movie where somebody who just accidentally pilfered a can of tuna is being charged with murder. But it happens, and it's more believable that that kind of mistake happened on that level of the police officer.
And I agree wholeheartedly because police officers are people, and they make mistakes, and they have egos, and they want to, I don't want to say please in the kowtow and do whatever they need to do sense, but they want to make their bosses happy. And when you catch a killer and you get them to confess, people are happy. When you get that killer to trial and that killer is convicted, then everybody's happy. And that goes to why some things might be read at a different tone. It's not malicious. It's not, I want to put this person in jail because I know they're innocent and I just want to put somebody in jail. It's a, hey, we talked back and forth and you got the words, we think this is the right guy. Just read it straight. Don't inflect. Don't insert your own judgment. Just read the words. And I think sometimes that's what happens. Again, I've never been on trial. I've never sat in a trial to see these things happen. And even if I did, I still wouldn't know it was happening because I didn't see the original part. Unless you watch a video of an interrogation, you don't know what happened. Now, I do listen to a lot of true crime related podcasts. Actually, I just listened to one in particular. It's called Sword and Scale. And they will play like 911 calls so you can actually hear the panic in people's voices. They will play interrogations so you can actually hear the tone in people's voices. This day and age, you can just see just about anything you want to see as a part of that. You would never just read the transcript. There would be a video of it. So I don't know that would get where it got to now, but it was the 90s and they didn't have all that technology, so it's pretty cool. But again, it goes to intent. I don't think that the sheriff had a malicious intent. He genuinely thought at the time that he had the right guys, and everybody says they're innocent when you arrest them for murder, so why would these guys be any different?
Though, I have to say that there is one telling scene in this movie that kind of lent that the sheriff is a little less than honorable. Again, not necessarily saying he was malicious or corrupt or anything, but that I believe the key word you use, that he had an ego that he wanted to show, and it was at the end when Vinny implored him to go check up on a lead or something like that. Hey, can you find this for me? And it's before we really knew exactly what, but it was about looking for a particular vehicle. And when he gets back on the stand, and he goes, what do you got? Because he didn't exactly know exactly what he's saying.
Didn't even know what to ask him. Just, I sent you on a mission. What'd you get?
And the one quick line, and it wasn't just the line. And we talk about inflection and things like that. It was the line that says pretty much to the effect of, on my own urging or my own cognition or something like that. And then he kind of looked to the side, like, are you going to argue this point? Of course, Vinny's not going to argue it because it's like, if it's going to win him the case, he doesn't care. He doesn't need that validation.
Right. It did talk to the sheriff's ego just a little bit.
Yeah, the sheriff needed that validation, and if it's going to win the case, Vinny was very willing to let him have it. But if that was a very telling, it's like, my own motivation, I went and checked up on this.
And I think, interestingly enough, when we're talking about ego and that sort of thing, it also gives the sheriff an out, and I'm sure that he was experienced enough, at least we're expected to believe that the character was experienced enough, to realize that if these guys were dismissed, if the case were dismissed, then he would look bad. So regardless of what information he had, it gave him a gentle letdown because he had already ascertained that these guys were probably innocent. Once he had that information, it was now I just need to salvage my ego. So, no harm, no foul. I agree with you 100%. I like the psychology of that, though. I mean, that's one of the things that I think really does make this a great movie. And I'm kind of spoiling where it belongs on my shelf, but the characters are fleshed out in a way that you could kind of see why they're doing the things that they're doing. The stereotypes are so well played that it's so easy to go, well, I can totally understand that. Like we just did with the sheriff, we could rationalize certain behaviors and say, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense because sheriffs are elected officials too. I mean, they want to be seen to be merciful when it's needed and firm when it's needed and, do all the things that they're supposed to do to uphold the law. So it's fascinating the way this was written and the way it's presented. And Marissa Tomei did, in fact, win Best Supporting Actress for this movie. So
I was going to bring that up too, that this was the movie that got her that Oscar. You beat me to the punch on that one.
Hell, I was on a roll. Sorry.
Well, then, since you got that one, then my ego must jump in and to totally segue that this is Fred Gwynne's last movie credit.
Really?
This was his last motion picture.
I didn't look him up. I mean, I knew that he was in this. I didn't realize this was the last thing that he was in.
Yeah, IMDb does have him credited for a few television shows, but his last motion picture was My Cousin Vinny in 1992, because he died later in mid-1993. This was his swan song, which I guess he.
I don't know if I would call it a swan song, but okay. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding the term.
I might be using it incorrectly, but I always understood it as like your last bit of art.
I always considered swan song as a last bit of art for a purpose before disappearing intentionally, not last bit of art before you happen to grow old and die.
Well, you're probably correct.
But listeners, again, if you want to weigh in on what swan song means to you,
because we're refusing to Google it just so we can listen.
We could do it during the recording, but it always makes those weird breaks, and I have to edit them out. So, since we're talking about Fred Gwynne and all of the other characters in this movie, there's so many actors in this movie. It's like, oh, that's that guy. Oh, it's that guy. Oh, I've seen him in things. Like, oh, hey, there's that guy. Like Lane Smith, the prosecutor, rather.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen him in a bunch of things, and it's kind of one of those like, oh, yeah, I know him. Never really the guy to carry his own movie, but he's been in a lot of stuff. The FBI guy that came in and provided the gas chromatograph description that has a turbo on the floor model. That guy has been in tons of movies.
Yeah, he was the Secretary of Defense in Independence Day.
Yeah, and Ralph Macchio. I mean, obviously we knew who he was because he was Karate Kid. Although that does remain disputed amongst certain people. Barney Stinson, for one. Do you know who Barney Stinson is?
I do not.
In the television series How I Met Your Mother, he's one of the characters. He's played by Doogie Howser, which is not his real name. He is firmly convinced that Ralph Macchio is not the Karate Kid. It's the blonde guy from Cobra Kai. That's the actual Karate Kid. And I'm sure you've seen the videos on YouTube of Daniel being a jerk, like how he totally got in the guy's business when he didn't need to. He was a total ass and, started this whole confrontation in the first place. And then at the All Valley Karate tournament, he used an illegal move to defeat his opponent and should not have won the tournament because of that. But the whole argument is predicated on, Daniel's an asshole and the other guy isn't, because he was just trying to live his life and Daniel got in his way. So, but that's not... That's neither here nor there, but that goes to Ralph Macchio. And Joe Pesci, obviously, you can watch Goodfellas, which came out right before this. When I say right before this, I think the year prior. But he is well known for playing, like I said, that fast-talking kind of guy. So,
About to say, Joe Pesci is more or less typecasted. I don't think you're going to see him play other roles other than the fast-talking Guido.
Yeah, there have been a couple that he was a little different in.
Such as?
Well, he was in The Good Shepherd with Matt Damon, if you've seen that movie. It's about the creation of the CIA, and he was a little less animated, but the first thing where he really sprung onto the scene was Lethal Weapon 2 as Leo Getz. I mean, at least as far as his IMDb history is concerned, and as far as my personal experience is concerned. It was Lethal Weapon 2, Goodfellas, and then My Cousin Vinny. And those were the three big things. He was big in the very late 80s, and most of the 90s, and then he disappeared for about 8 years, and he's been reasonably quiet. Since 1998, he's done 4 movies, and 1 is in post-production. So, the same question that we had asked about Mira Sorvino in our Mimic episode, and the same thing that we talked about with the voice of Alice in the Alice in Wonderland episode most recently is, well, why did he step away? Did he just figure like, hey, you know what? I've made my money, I'm good? Or was it, I keep getting typecast as the same thing? Did something happen in his life? Was he difficult to work with?
He didn't put out.
He didn't put out for Harvey Weinstein. It's kind of one of those, what happened? Where did he go? I am kind of curious. I mean, it's completely his decision as to what he wants to do with his life. So he could have just said, nah, I'm done.
Yeah. But, kind of going back to the movie about everybody who's in this movie, I think you can pretty much make an entire episode of that guy who was in that thing with this movie.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, we might want to do that one day, is talk about character actors that are in various movies. I mean, we could do like a bonus episode or something, or... Well,
it would have to be centered then about the documentary called That Guy Who Was in That Thing. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No, I haven't. Well, I'll have to look for that.
Yeah, I kind of found it on Netflix. I don't know if it's still on there, but I found it one day and it just looked interesting. And a bunch of these, like I said, these actors who aren't well known, but you see their face and you're like, hey, wasn't he in that other movie and everything? And it's these guys talk about how they've made an entire career of being that guy in that thing. So again, this movie is pretty much full of that.
Yep.
I mean, my focus was like, I was looking at the one character, one of my favorite scenes in the movie about the magic grits. The actor's name was Maury Chaykin. Again, forgive me if I mispronounced that, but he was playing the witness Tipton. It was like, they didn't have enough time.
Yep.
It's like I was making eggs and grits.
No self-respect in Southern or whatever, instant grits.
Yeah, he was also in Dances with Wolves and way back in the movie War Games. I don't remember him in that movie. It's just definitely one of the ones that stands out in his movie credits.
Yeah, but he's listed in not hundreds, but I mean tens of things.
Oh yeah,
like 60 or 70.
Yeah, his
entries.
His IMDb page
he's definitely making a living.
Is not tiny. Well, not anymore. He died in 2010.
Okay, well he was definitely making a living.
he made himself a good living.
Why you got to spoil my fun?
See, I don't even know the character's name. Jim Sting in War Games, but. Hey.
Yeah, again, totally irrelevant because he was that guy. Hey, it's that guy. I do that in a lot of movies. I watch a lot of MASH. I don't know about you, but when you watch MASH, it was 11 years of television, and occasionally, especially in the later episodes, but some of the earlier ones, you'll see Patrick Swayze go, holy crap, that's Patrick Swayze!
Oh, yeah.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Mm-hmm.
All of the actors that you see throughout that show that went on to bigger and better things, but they were just a character for a brief moment in an episode of television.
Well, the amazing thing is a lot of television back in those, a lot of sitcoms. Yeah, I watched a lot of MASH. Recently, I've got into watching Barney Miller. But yeah, a lot of episodes, it's like, hey, yeah.
It's got a funky bass line.
Yeah, it's like, hey, there's that guy. He just made a short appearance in Barney Miller. It's just some perpetrator.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, had they not gone on to be somebody, you just wouldn't care, because I'm sure, everybody who just played a guy in an episode of Barney Miller or MASH or whatnot went on to go do something, one would hope. It just so happens that there are, a handful that went on to go break out.
Well, yeah, it's like if they didn't go on to do anything, then yeah, obviously we wouldn't be talking about them.
Then why would you care? It's like somebody I walked by on the street. Hey, it's that guy. No, it's that girl.
But because they either became incredibly famous or they had a long career of doing the same exact thing, for us to go, it's like, yeah, wow, look at that IMDb page.
Yeah, I do like IMDb. I know we often use it during the show as a reference because it does give the click, and you can follow it down the rabbit hole, the 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon and all that. IMDb makes it easy, and there are games that do it for you. But this is an example of just people rising to a certain height and making a living, and you still don't necessarily know who they are. It's cool, but the other aspect, I suppose, from a purely employment, aspect, and I'm not sure if these guys read for these roles or if they just go, hey, go get so-and-so and we'll put him in here.
Probably a little column A, column B.
Yeah, but, there's some parts where you're like, couldn't you just get other people to try this? It seems like this is an awful lot of the same people just being called to be the higher level extra or whatever. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just, I want to see more different people in movies and roles, because like Mel Gibson in the 90s, I think we talked about that briefly. You saw him in everything, like Wesley Snipes. You saw him in everything. Like, somebody else probably could have played that role. Like, oh, but we needed to have Wesley Snipes. He's a box office draw, until he's not.
Which goes to what we said is like, movie making is, above all things, something to make money.
Oh, absolutely.
So let me ask you, is there a particular scene in this movie that you find yourself watching over and over again, or like if you're just bored at the office, throw on YouTube and it's like, I'd like to see this scene, and you YouTube it?
One, I don't do that at work, so
okay.
Just gonna tell you right now, and I don't often go YouTubing scenes from movies. One of the things in my notes that I was going to point out is it's been a long time since I've seen this movie from beginning to end, and it's mostly because when it's on, I usually catch it in the middle somewhere and sort of watch it from there forward, and I know how it ends, so what's the big deal? But I haven't seen the whole movie in forever. That being said, one of my favorite scenes is the Marissa Tomei scene, because she does it so well, the testimony on the stand. When she says, no, that's a bullshit question. It's like, no one can answer that. And her mannerisms and the affected accent and just the character are so well put together that you get sucked into it. Like, oh yeah, look, she worked in a garage with her brothers and her uncle and a dad and a dad's dad and her uncle's dad and her mom's dad, and everybody was a mechanic. That's the part that sucks me in, is when they close the case, if you will, and say, it's this, yeah. So, but the interesting thing is, Vinny had to have known that before he ever asked her, which again goes to trial lawyering. Never ask a question to which you do not know the answer. Unless you're pretty sure, obviously, he had to do that with the sheriff, but he kind of already knew probably where he was going to go with that. But he had to have known, otherwise he wouldn't have went and retrieved her so that she could do what he knew she could do. And he wouldn't have written the note to the sheriff to do the thing. So that's my favorite scene overall. But I did find some of the earlier stuff kind of interesting, especially the part where they're in the prison and Vinny first shows up and they have the whole misunderstanding about, the prison experience,
either way, you're going to get fucked.
Yeah, exactly. So that was interesting too. Again, having seen this on deployments a number of times, I've walked into either a berthing or a dining area where this movie was on the television, and I've seen 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And this is also very often quoted, that the two Utes... I'm sorry, what did you just say? That's a famous line. So, there's a lot of things that this movie is credited, or is at least injected into the cultural movie quoting zeitgeist. What about you?
Well, I have to say that the Marissa Tomei scene that you mentioned, where she does her testimony, that is a great scene. I'm not trying to downplay it, but I have to say that the part that edges me out, and it's something I really like to do, because kind of if I go into my childhood psychology here, it's like I always kind of grew up reading a lot. My father instilled for me to read a lot. We had a lot of books. We had a lot of publications, periodicals and everything, and a lot of it on subject that I enjoyed, airplanes and science and things like that. So I'm not saying that I was more knowledgeable than anybody at school, but I knew little tidbits of facts more than anybody. It seemed, I should say, I'll qualify that. So I got a lot of instances in my memory of people telling me, no, you're wrong. That never happened. That's not the case. That's not true. Now, and this was before the time I could whip out a smartphone and call up Wikipedia or, it's like, nope, see here, right here. So, I had to deal with that. I had to swallow a lot of pride because I didn't have the means to prove somebody that, no, this is really accurate. This really did happen. This airplane really can do this and stuff like that. So the scene that I really liked in this movie is when Vinny questions Mr. Tipton about, what did you see? It's like, oh yeah, I saw them do this and everything. It's like, really? It's like to really say that your information isn't exactly correct because you say it only took you 5 minutes, but grits take 20 minutes. And then he goes on to the next witness. Is like, how far away did you say they were? Really? How many fingers am I holding up? Well, maybe you really didn't see it and everything. Just that collective part where he does those three witnesses and shows that the prosecution's assertion is not 100% correct. And he doesn't do it maliciously. He doesn't do it by attacking anybody specifically or talk about character flaws. He just says, no, these are the facts. And I admire that. And I love that because of my childhood experience. Not to say that, somebody is stupid or whatever, which happened to me a lot, still happens today, but to say, no, this is why. Because of this body of evidence. That's why I admire that. I don't know if it's can be considered one scene or just the collective scenes, but just that part where he really starts tearing down the prosecution's assertion using actual evidence.
Or at the very least, actually disproving the assertions that you think you saw what you saw. And the witnesses on the stand were 100% certain that that was what they'd seen until presented with the possibility that their perceptions could be wrong. Because everyone is 100% certain that they are right and they saw what they saw until someone says, and, like you said, presents it in a way that's not combative, challenges that perception and says, hey, you said you saw this, but with this tree in the way and these bushes in the way and this dirt on here...
it wasn't necessarily attacking the person or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm totally agreeing with you because... The way that he did it was excellent, and I
like I said, for me though the focus wasn't necessarily the witnesses. I mean, yeah, that's where he had to work on and everything, and say, maybe this isn't what you saw, maybe it didn't take you that much time, or whatever. But it's like I said, taking down Mr. Trotter's assertion that, oh yeah, I can prosecute these guys, I can ruin their lives for eternity and put them away for a long time based on this. But
but it goes to the bricks. They're going to show you that this is a brick until it's not.
And then Vinny going on saying it's like, well, this person didn't really spend this much time. This person didn't really see what they thought they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And
pointing out the logical flaws in the argument, or at least the flaws. Yeah, no, I think that's what I was trying to say less eloquently than what you had said when you were explaining why you liked that scene.
Those are the scenes that I tend to YouTube most often on downtimes.
There were a couple of little things that I caught this time through that kind of struck me as a little more amusing, but there's a point, Lane Smith, the actor that plays the prosecutor, was talking about not the heinous crime, but the heinous crime. And if you're familiar with Law and Order Special Victims Unit, and they do the opening monologue bit, certain cases are especially heinous, blah, 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 and those are the ones prosecuted by the Special Victims Unit. For some reason, I have always said, and certain crimes are committed by hyenas or something like that. So I've always done that as a thing, and I found that amusing. One of the things that I did notice on this rewatch is the amount of foreshadowing regarding the tires, specifically traction and the way rear-wheel drive works. When Vinny and Mona Lisa stopped for the first time in their car and said, it developed a shimmy. One, that establishes her knowledge of cars, and two, it establishes the traction piece because they're talking about the wheels getting a shimmy, kind of points towards the wheels like these are going to be significant. And then later on, after they've been through 2 motels and they're in the cabin and he goes out and fires at the screeching owl and they end up in the car in the middle of a field and they get stuck, the camera makes a point of showing you that one tire is spinning and the other is not, but it's subtle. And had I not watched this from beginning to end, I wouldn't have noticed all of the little foreshadowing points. Now, I could be trying to shove them into a hole and say they were foreshadowing.
Well, they can be interpreted as foreshadowing or as just a means that made when she did say it's like, well, everybody in Alabama knows that when you get stuck in the mud, one tire spins, the other one does nothing. And everyone's like, that's right, you know? Knowing that that scene had happened made that more impactful.
No, absolutely, and that was the point. It was foreshadowing to give you that, hey, we showed you, it was a show, not tell, and then they told you later, like, that's why that was important. So I thought that was excellent, and they did that a couple of times, but the tire one is the one that jumps out most.
Well, we could say that's movie-making craftsmanship.
Yeah, and that's why this is an excellent movie. So one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about is the older man, younger woman relationship that seems to exist as a stereotype in Hollywood, and it's perfectly okay. But if you switch it around, older woman, younger man, for some reason it feels weird because you don't normally see it in movies. But Joe Pesci, when this movie was made, he was 49 years old. Marissa Tomei was 28 years old when this movie was made. That's a 21 year age difference. That is old enough to be her father, and yet it's perfectly acceptable on the screen. Now, you can say that actors can portray 10 years up, 10 years down, give or take. They can, obviously, some actors look younger than they really are, that sort of thing. But did it bother you at all, or does it bother you at all when they do this in movies in general, when they have that 20-year age difference in couples?
I have to say, you're probably asking the wrong person on that one because my wife and I have a 17-year difference.
Really?
You didn't know that?
I did not know that. I thought she was a little older. I mean, she doesn't look it. I've met your wife, and I'm not trying to say that she looks.
She's not in the room
old.
right now.
I just didn't know how old she was, so I knew there was a bit of an age difference. I thought it was about 5 years.
No,
so
it's a 17-year difference. I personally have not had a problem with age differences. I mean, obviously, I have a problem with like a 40-year-old and somebody who's a minor.
Right. And I think that goes without saying.
It should go without saying,
anyway.
But I don't know. In today's day and age, I feel you need to put a disclaimer on everything.
Yeah, one would think, and then in the day and age of the Larry Nassar trial, which again dates this podcast to a specific area and time, and we generally try to do that, but, the guy was convicted of sexually assaulting 150 plus young girls, so obviously it happens. But anyway, let's move back to we'll call it May to mid-September romances, because it's not really May-December.
No, but I mean, I personally have not had a problem showing such age differences. I mean, I think that relationships are dependent on a lot more than just age. I mean, age can be an indicator as to whether or not chemistry can and will not work. Obviously, do they have things in common that they can talk about?
It depends on your interests. I mean, yeah, that's neither here nor there. I mean, that part's not a big deal. I guess what I'm really trying to ask is, do you have an issue with it as a stereotype in Hollywood? Because when you watch movies, 90 times out of 100 in a relationship movie, there is, I mean, you've got, Mel Gibson in What a Woman Wants is, I think, 60 years old or something, 55, upper 50s, low 60s. And he's chasing a 24-year-old woman, which, again, is fine. If that's what she wants to do, that's fine. But that happens in so many movies that it's actually a trope, and it frustrates some people.
Are you asking as like when it's the older man, or just that just a general age difference?
I'm asking more as the older man, younger woman relationship, because that's so often cast in movies where people will get uncomfortable if it's the other way around. Let's say Helen Mirren decides she wants to date somebody young, Jake Gyllenhaal, I guess.
Maybe I misunderstood your original question. That it's like, does it bother me to see that so often?
Yeah, that's more what it is. Does it bother you to see it more often in movies? Because
than the other way around?
Than the other way around, and I recognize that it exists. Again, in your case, I didn't know, but when I was first in the Navy, one of the guys that I was on the ship with was, I think, 38, and his girlfriend was 20. Again, same, 18-year age difference or something, but they got along fine because they had similar interests and they, liked each other, so that kind of works out.
Yeah, I'm
too.
about to say, it's like, for me, in my past, I have dated women who were about 5 to 6 years older than I was, and like you said, we had similar interests and everything was good, except the relationships didn't last. for whatever reason or another and everything. So in a social sense, real world social sense, I don't have a problem with it. Do I have a problem with it seeing it in movies? Obviously not, because again, my real world social sense translates into my movie going experience, in which case I would not have a problem seeing that. I would not, because I mean, I think Helen Mirren is an incredibly attractive woman, and I would date her in a second if she gave me a second look, you know?
Helen, if you're listening, or if any of our listeners know Helen, Dan's married, so he's off the market.
But again, that being said, I think the thing that does disturb me is that, yeah, you don't see it as often in Hollywood, in movies, I should say, that it is off-putting to enough people where it doesn't get portrayed in movies. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Again, your personal perspective sort of, I guess, shifts the nature of the question because you probably don't pay as much attention to it as some other people do. Because you're currently in a relationship with that large delta.
But you're also talking to somebody who is an advocate of marriage equality and equality in general and everything. So it's just like, it would be very hypocritical of me to say that, yeah, I don't have a problem with mixed race couples. I don't have a problem with same gender couples. But I have a problem with couples who are of different age or something like that, or too much of an age gap. It would not be consistent.
Again, I think I'm misrepresenting or mispresenting rather the purpose of the question. It's not so much whether you have an issue with older men dating younger women or older women dating younger men, but the frequency with which it occurs one way and not the other in Hollywood. And I think you already answered that question where, yes, it was an issue. So
yeah, because I think we've discussed in previous podcasts that representation is everything.
Sure, you have to represent that, but I do think that Hollywood in general tends to over-represent those relationships men to women as opposed to women to men. Older to younger in that order.
Yeah,
so.
And that's the thing. I mean, to if it's to be portrayed in a movie, the movie almost has to be about that relationship. It can't be just an aspect of the movie. It's just like the characters just happen to be of that age difference or whatever. It just happens to be an older woman and a younger man and everything. But the movie's about galactic travel or whatever. But
yeah, or the movie's about getting your cousin out of jail for murder. I thought it was interesting that Marissa Tomei was so young in this movie. I mean, she was 28. I didn't realize that she was 28 when this movie was made. Never really occurred to me. But I knew that Joe Pesci was a little bit older, and I was just kind of curious, again, how you felt about it. It doesn't really bother me, except that it is, like I said earlier, overrepresented as a thing in Hollywood, and it's accepted one way, but it's frowned upon the other. But they're getting better, and I've read some articles about, like, Sandra Bullock in movies where she's chasing younger men, or, stuff like that. So it's not as bad as it used to be in the sense that it's not portrayed as often, and it's not as looked upon as negatively, I guess, from the other side. So, again, it goes to representation, it goes to Hollywood is actually getting better about some of these things. So...
the thing is, when you brought up the age difference between Joe Pesci and Marissa Tomei, it reminded me of a movie, a 1960 movie, called It Started in Naples, starring Clark Gable and Sophia Loren. And Clark Gable, at the time of that filming, was, I believe, 50. He was born in 1901. It was 1960. So 59 years old he was in this movie. Sophia Loren, and so do the math, she was born in 1934. So she wasn't even 30 years old when this movie came out. So she was 26, I believe. So a 26-year-old and somebody who was almost 60, who was just a stone's throw away. So, yeah, this kind of thing goes way back.
It's been going on in Hollywood for a long time, and I think it's been recognized, and I think that Hollywood in general is making it less of a thing by allowing it to happen the other way and just playing with the ages on either side of the fence. All right, so I've pretty much covered everything I really wanted to talk about. There was only one other thing that I kind of wanted to point out, and there's just little gripes and complaints about the movie. They're just crazy minor, and goes back to this movie coming out in 92. Does nobody wear seatbelts in this film? Nobody ever? There's a couple of times where they just hop in the car. Nowadays, you'd see seatbelts going down, and it would be a pronounced like, "Ah, ha ha ha, I am putting on my seatbelt. Click. We cannot move the vehicle until I'm clicked into place." And it's when they're like hopping in.
I gotta say, it's one of those things where unless it's an actual point that's relevant to the story, it's one of those details of everyday life that nobody really notices. Personally, I didn't notice until you just brought it up, to tell you the truth. As many times as I've seen this movie, I don't think I've ever took notice that nobody puts on a seatbelt. And thinking about it, I don't think anybody ever mentions seatbelt in a movie unless it's a foreshadowing that there's going to be a car crash. And the fact whether or not somebody has a seatbelt on is going to make a difference in how the story progresses.
Yeah, I disagree. I think, especially nowadays when it's a thing that you kind of want to get into the human psyche, or at least in America, is you put your seatbelt on, just to sort of build that mindset. Like, oh, look, they put their seatbelt on too.
Well, the only other time I see it mentioned in movies is when it shows that somebody who's either, very, very, retentive, or, it's like, hey, I'm not moving this car till you put your seatbelt on. So, again, it lends to character building.
Yeah, and setting the environment, that sort of thing.
Yeah. This person is annoying.
Yeah, when they specifically make a big deal out of it, and you know that this is a movie where someone could get in a car wreck, they're like, oh, hey, put your seatbelt on. Or when they point out, like, hey, you're not wearing your seatbelt. No, I'm fine. And then they get into a car wreck. Yeah, that's fine. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about one of those little things that you see in movies that no one else pays attention to, and it kind of makes you a little nuts. You're like, seatbelt, damn it! Like, nobody else cares. It has nothing to do with the plot, but it's one of those things where you're like, you're in a car, could you put your seatbelt on?
Or the conversation when you get into debates with trekkers. It's like, it's the 25th century. Yeah. Don't they have seatbelts?
Yeah, and I like the fact that, again, this weird sidebar, whether you like the Abrams verse or not, one of the cool things they did do was put seatbelts on the seats. Like, hey, finally, it only took you 300 centuries. Good job. Well, not that long, but anyway, I only pointed out because it's a thing that drives me nuts when I watch any movie. That, and when you're watching usually the older movies, but it happens in sitcoms and stuff like that are low budget, when they're driving the car that is just a set and they have the movie going in the background, as they're driving by, and you see them just wangling the steering wheel like it's just on a free axis and it's just rolling, and if I did that in my car, I would be moving all over the place. But, the steering wheel just like, do, because that's what you think of. Like, I got to do something with my hands, it's moving. It's just a little thing that, again, makes no difference whatsoever. I just happen to notice it.
Here's a little tidbit that you might not have noticed, but after mentioning it to people, they can't unsee it. Watch movies when they're driving, when the camera is the aspect, like as if the camera was on the hood of the car looking through the windshield of the two characters.
Okay.
Does the car have a rear view mirror?
Now I have to analyze that.
Exactly. There's a lot of movies where there isn't one because it would block the camera's point of view. Or sometimes, like say, when they're doing that little thing with the movie in the background, and there literally is a camera on the hood looking at the two characters. Obviously, there's no windshield, or else that would cause glare. You just assume that there's one, but in the absence of any kind of physical barrier, you can't put a rearview mirror there.
Yeah, sometimes they just filter that stuff out, though. I mean, they'll put a polarizing filter in post or something like that. But yeah, you're right. I do like the ones where there's no windows whatsoever.
But there would also be an obstruction to the camera, and you'd block the, So again, unless the rearview mirror is pivotal, like, they need to adjust it and say, yeah, somebody's following us. It's just not there.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. Continuity issues.
That's just Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, there was, and the only other thing that I had to say about the movie was there was a point at which Judge Munster was banging the gavel. Sorry. Every time I see him, I just think Herman Munster, so it is what it is. But he was banging the gavel repeatedly, and when he was doing it, the gavel noise would sound while the gavel was in midair on the way down. It hadn't actually banged on anything. And maybe it was just me, because it only happened once, because once I noticed it, I rewound it, and did that? Oh, that's weird. That's annoying. And maybe it was just because I was, focused on that, because it was the center point of him banging the gavel. But when sounds don't happen at the time I think they should, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe that's just the way it was working, and it was an echo, and that's actually real life. But That was the only other complaint, was like some very minor sound editing. Other than that, I thought this was a great movie. So
Yeah, I think that if we're gonna talk about little nitpicky things or anything, I don't really have a lot of nitpicky things about this movie, but there is one thing that caused a little bit of confusion, or maybe just something I just couldn't readily explain. After the scene, after the prosecutor Trotter says that the people are going to drop all charges, and everybody's cheering, it's the happy moment. I think it's the one you're talking about where he's banging the gavel, trying to tell the courtroom to quiet down.
oh no, it was the gavel was before that, but yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a scene where Ralph Macchio, forgive me, I forget exactly who he's hugging. I don't know if it was his friend or if it was Vinny or something, but
He was hugging Vinny.
was he hugging Vinny? Okay, but
Yeah.
the thing is that was most memorable though is he's got this look on his face, like doesn't have his eyes closed. He does have tears in his eyes, but they're not closed. He's not holding Vinny like thank you. He's looking at somebody. I just assume he's looking at the judge or something, but it's almost kind of like that defiant look, like you didn't get me, or something like that. And I it's confusing because I never throughout the whole movie it never felt that he had a feeling that any one of these people were out to get him. Like I said, this movie didn't really have a villain.
So I know exactly what you're talking about because I reacted to that as a, well, that was odd kind of moment as well. And now that I think about it, maybe the gavel scene was when he was trying to restore order to the court after the dismissal, or if they requested the dismissal and all that. But because that had gone on for so long and he'd requested order in the court to try and get everyone to calm down, and the way I read that look that you're talking about is the dismissive, like, yeah, no, we're going to celebrate our happiness right now. You can go stick that gavel where the sun doesn't shine, and just be patient until we hug this out and celebrate our good fortune. And that was kind of the way I read it as a look. Did it need to be there? Meh. And I agree, no one was ever really in an evil, malicious kind of way the antagonist. So
Yeah, it just like I said, it to me it just seemed like just one. I don't even consider it a flaw or anything. It was confusing to me. That's probably the closest thing that I can come to as far as presenting anything negative about this movie.
okay, with that out of the way, what are your final thoughts and sort of where does this belong on your shelf, or where would you put it?
Final thoughts. I think that this movie, if I was to group like a top 10 of quotable movies, I think that I don't know where, but it would definitely be on this list. I mean, I often, when people say, it's like, hey, I told you to do this and everything, and it's like that line, you were serious about that?
Fair enough.
And unless you're a fan of this movie, that most people don't know what that's from, they'll just take it verbatim, like, is he really that stupid? It's like, but that's from that movie. But as far as where this belongs on my shelf, I'm sorry to say that it is part of general population. The DVD edition I have is, for lack of a better way to describe it, nothing special. I mean, this is a special movie, so it's a special movie that just occupies the shelf. I think if somebody were to come out with an anniversary edition that had like all kinds of special features that related it to law school and all these other aspects, then it might have a better place. But for now, general pop.
Yeah, incorporate some of the audio interviews that have been put out into the universe.
Yeah,
That'd be cool.
you.
For me, I will say this movie is a breakout from general population in the middle of the movie set sense. I would put this on the second shelf. It's not one of the best movies I've ever seen. It's memorable for some of the same reasons that you talked about earlier. It's got some quotes. Sometimes they're a little situation specific, and other times you can use the quote to allude to why you're saying what you're saying, if that makes sense. It doesn't necessarily fit the exact scenario, but it fits enough that you can use it. It's a great comedy. I like Joe Pesci outside of his standard mafioso kind of role, where he's, same sort of guy, just in a more positive role, if you will. He's actually doing something good with his fast talking.
Yeah, somebody you'd actually want to hang out with and not fear for your life.
Yeah, exactly. Not someone who might, just randomly, pop a cap in me and then go bury me out in the middle of nowhere. The consistency throughout this movie and some of the foreshadowing that I'd never noticed before really sort of brings this up to a level that I hadn't looked at it before, because I'd always sort of considered it. But I mean, prior to this rewatch, I probably would have just put it in general population. Just, yeah, it was funny, I enjoyed it, it was a good time. But looking at the way these things interplayed and the foreshadowing, like I mentioned, and the characters and some of the conversation, yeah, I gotta say this is out of general population on the good side. It's probably middle of my second shelf, and I think that the only thing that really sort of draws it down a little bit is some of the stuff in the beginning that I'd kind of mentioned, where it's like, well, shouldn't they be in handcuffs? I mean, shouldn't they understand that they're being arrested for murder, or they're being, charged with suspicion of murder? I mean, you'd think they'd know that, like, when they were stopped, like shortly after they were stopped and they were shoved into the back of a police car. Somebody had to tell them something, and I'm sure that was, at least 30, 45 minutes, depending on how long it took to get to the police department or the sheriff's office. So, there's some little minor things, but that's okay, because that gets this scenario going where you have to call Cousin Vinny, and he has to be able to piece together the elements of the crime and put out why these guys are innocent. So again, it's pushing the I believe, and I can let you have these little bits in the beginning to set up the scenario. I love this movie. I think that's excellent, even though I don't own it. So that's where I would put it if I owned it. I might go see if I can't find it in a bargain bin somewhere.
I'm sure you'd be able to, or at least on Amazon at a discounted price.
Interestingly enough, I have gone on Amazon to find a movie that I had a strong emotional attachment to that is a great big pile of poop, and paid like $30 for it, so that's really not that big of a deal. Like, if I want it, I'll go get it, and, Amazon be damned. It's probably, I think $12 or something on there. I'll have to look it up. But, all right. So...
$4.99.
There we go. Easy day.
For the DVD multi-format $5.99, a Blu-ray $20.77.
I will probably get the DVD. I was having a conversation with somebody. Maybe it was you. We were talking about why you would get a movie in Blu-ray versus why you would get a movie on DVD.
It sounds like a conversation we would have.
Yeah, and it's sometimes I just don't need that great of a resolution. Like, it's a plot movie. It's like getting To Kill a Mockingbird on Blu-ray. Why do I need that? The movie was not shot in that kind of resolution. It was never even thought about. Like, it's just a plot movie. I just need to see the plot.
There's a whole conversation about that, though. Black and white movies, actually, by
well, their resolution is greater because of black and whiteness.
Yeah, I was going to say because of, by default, the nature of black and white film has a higher resolution than color film, and so sometimes, depending, a Blu-ray on an old black and white movie is better, but not always. Not always.
Maybe I used a bad example, but it's still, kind of one of those things where I'm like, it was shot 70, 80 years ago. I don't need all of that resolution.
Yeah, I think, though, that the point you said, it's a plot movie rather than a visual movie, and that's why I continue to have it. I mean, obviously, I'm in no rush to buy it on Blu-ray. It doesn't make a difference unless the only reason that would compel me to buy Blu-ray is if only the Blu-ray had, like, all the special features that I like. The documentaries, the making of.
Which again goes to why we kind of want to keep the physical copies, is those special features. And I will take a moment. I did share on our Facebook page, and I think you've seen it, a link to an essay or an article, if you will, that says, in defense of physical media. And I agree with it 100%. It's part of why I like having the movies.
Yeah, I still have yet to read it, but I did see that, and I think that's very relevant to our podcast.
Cool. All right. Well, let's find out what we're going to be talking about on our next episode. Because it's episode 23, and I would push the random magic movie generator button. But if I recall correctly, we had already discussed what we're going to be doing. And for our listeners, we are going to be deviating from our stand-em randomly selected movie. And I'm going to let Dan explain what it is that we will be doing on our next episode.
Well, it's what would seem like a randomly chosen number, but it's, I guess, in a sense, number 23 being a special number to me. Not going to go into why, but I thought the deviation this time, instead of the last time was episode 13, we spoke of the genres that we liked. Brian here had expressed that he'd rather not revisit that, so it's cool. We did that. We're gonna try this time.
Not that I don't want to talk about other genres, but since we already did an episode about genres, I thought if we did something a little bit different, that it would be better as opposed to going back and revisiting the same style of conversation, same.
And then I say
matter.
I'm all for exploring different avenues and everything. I mean, that's variety is a spice of life. So we came up with we agreed upon. I think can I say we agreed upon it?
We certainly did.
Okay. We're going to talk about the relationship between books and the movies that are based upon them. And I thought more specifically, I don't know if you said you were going to do it this way, but for me, I chose 3 movies that I saw that I had absolutely no idea were based on books when I saw them. It was kind of an afterthought. So for the 3 movies that I chose, first I chose Hellraiser, because at the time of seeing, I did not know it was based on Clive Barker's novella, The Hellbound Heart. I chose the 1982 version of The Thing by John Carpenter, based on a book called Who Goes There? And Blade Runner, my absolute favorite sci-fi movie. At the time of the viewing, I had no idea it was based on a book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So we'll have a short discussion on those 3 movies and their relationships with their books that they're based on.
Yeah, I haven't chosen my movies yet. I'll be honest, I'm still struggling with this one. I have a couple of ideas, and what I'm thinking about for my part of the conversation and what I'm trying to bring to it is not necessarily movies that I didn't know were based on books, but movies that I absolutely did know were based on books that the general public didn't. And as an example, Johnny Mnemonic, the Keanu Reeves movie from the mid-90s, or early 90s was based on a short story by William Gibson. And he's an author that I care a great deal for and have read most of his work. But a lot of people didn't realize that this was based on a short story. And whether or not they executed that well. And rather other movies that are based on things that it later comes to light that people go, oh yeah, that's this short story that was like maybe 3 pages long that somebody filled in 78 hours with, or whatever, if you catch what I'm saying. So that's kind of where I'm going, my intent during episode 23, and I hope that we come up with a good, entertaining conversation. I think we will. I just kind of wanted to make sure that our listeners knew what we were going to be doing. We were going to be changing it up a little bit because Dan asked for it. It's a mutual show. We're co-hosts together, so we do what we do. All editorial decisions are made by our editorial staff, who receive no compensation for their editorial staffiness. We'll cut that out. That's bored.
I dare you to leave it in.
Okay. So we will not be pushing the random magic movie button. Kind of sad about that because I get to do that every single time. Dan doesn't actually have the random magic movie button on his computer. I am the only one. I'm the sole possessor of the random magic movie button. And with that, if you wish to talk to us about the random magic movie button, about how you feel about My Cousin Vinny, how you might want to provide any input for our episode 23, or provide us any feedback for any other episodes that you may have listened to. We would like to celebrate our 400th download. If you'd like to share that joy with us and just say congratulations, you can do that on our Facebook page, on our Podbean page, and via email at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. Not giving out the addresses for the carrier pigeons, but, maybe a nice skyplane in LA or, over the Hampton Roads area. One of the two of us will see it, and we'll let the other one know. With that, Dan, did you have a movie-specific outro for us?
Win some, lose some.
Nice. You sly dog. All right. And with that, we will see you in 2 weeks with our talk about books and movies. Not sure what we're going to title that episode yet, but thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.